The hustler and the kook who made it big in the late 70s, and it was an Apple computer. Today on Dinty's Hideaway. In 1978, tech support for an MSI machine was calling Gary Kildall to his office. The computer industry, as we know it, consisted of just a few hundred people. In the 1990s, computer companies began to rapidly fail, even while selling their wares in record numbers. This came as a shock to most people. But in the 1970s, it came as a shock when those same companies could meet their weekly payroll. Because of Steve Wozniak's genius, Apple Computer had a unique and cool product offering, but for everyone else, there was Gary Kildall and CP/M. In the 3 years leading up to the establishment of Microphone International, a lot happened. Both the Intel 186 and the Zilog Z80 were released. The first computers began to trickle in that would allow any end user to see both things on a monitor and print the results. HP and companies like Xerox with their PARC project had the huge disadvantage that they had to make the use case to executives who feared and didn't understand the computer. So most of their work was never seen outside company walls. TI could have released their personal computer in 1975, but no one would greenlight it. So the teeny, small guys at around 10 grand and understanding of the potential of personal computers were responsible for all the innovation that mattered before 1980. Intergalactic Digital Research and Kildall made the operating system that would allow it to run, but there was no killer application. Something had to come along to convince the world that computers could actually serve a purpose in the everyday lives of the everyday person. Seymour Rubenstein was the marketing chief at MSI, one of two major computer companies who existed in the mid-70s. Having said that, MSI was one of those companies where the employees were in a race to get to the bank on payday because there was never enough money to cover the entire payroll. He wasn't really a computer guy, Seymour was a marketing guy, but above all else he was a hustler, in the best sense of the word. He had an idea of what the world wanted out of computers. Basically, people wanted to communicate and file stuff better. That's really no different than it is today. While there were teeny database applications that were written for one brand of computer, or something like the electric pencil, there was nothing else out there. The biggest issues were memory and storage, and issues we still deal with. Early word processors like Scripsit were available on many platforms and could write anything you wanted, so long as it was about 4 pages or less. Also, printing was a big issue. The only printers around were called Daisy Wheel, and they actually printed slower than a good secretary could type and cost thousands of dollars. But in 1977, a company called Diablo introduced a line printer, what was later known as a dot matrix, which could print anything the user could dream up in any font, even renderings of early graphics. Even though the line printer required its own interface card and was serial, meaning it could only capture data and not send it back to the computer, and even though you had to set up the baud rate and other settings before you ran your word processor or it wouldn't print, even with all that, it was revolutionary because it was affordable. So with the printer, the monitor, the keyboard, and the computer, all of which within stabbing distance of millions of Americans, all that was missing were the applications. There were probably about 100 guys with companies formed on less than $10,000 who all knew that the word processor and a sorting program, later to be known as a spreadsheet, were the two killer apps that would make someone rich. But Seymour Rubenstein was first. But all this didn't happen overnight. Seymour had to woo programmer Ron Barnaby away from MSI, and he had to do some work for Credit Suisse to make ends meet, but within a year, Barnaby had written Supersort and Wordmaster, and released them in a computer show in New York. Through the 1970s, there were a lot of dedicated word processing systems you could buy, but most of them were north of $100,000, or about $1 million in today's dollars. They were sold by Wang, Digital Equipment Corporation, and others. With Supersort and Wordmaster, now you could do the same thing and better for about 1/20th of the price. The Supersort didn't catch on the way that Wordmaster and later Wordstar did, but Rubenstein kept at it. Later it became Quattro Pro, one of the 3 original spreadsheets. But even as Wordstar was seeing amazing success and selling for $300 a copy, there were problems. Chief among them were intellectual property issues. An operating system is more or less a service. It allows you to do other things in your computer and requires constant updating. Without a relationship with the operating system's creator's company, you can't really use it. Applications, on the other hand, could be installed once, never updated and run for years. Sharing applications was such a common thing, the software companies usually released two versions of their software, one with copy protection, which was cheaper, and one without. Aggressive companies wanting a piece of Wordstar's pie would sell their inferior word processing software for $300 and advertise them as not copy protected, meaning it was $300 and use it however you want. There was nothing to stop the copying of software other than the standard copyright emblem at the bottom of the disc label. People wrote books that would serve as manual alternatives and sell them at the bookstore at the mall, aimed specifically at people using copied, or pirated as it soon be called, applications. Rubenstein figured there were about 100 people using Wordstar for one sale, meaning that his real revenue was $3 a copy, and worse, he could not make any money on training or supplemental manuals because there's a whole cottage industry doing that too. This stuff we take for granted today didn't exist in the late 70s. There were a lot of good creative computer people, but none of them had any money because the structure to allow them to get paid for their work didn't exist yet. Rubenstein took two approaches. First, he partnered with people like Adam Osborne and allowed them to bundle Wordstar with their computers, collecting a royalty that, while small, was several times his real revenue on the retail version. Several manufacturers, most notably Osborne, K-Pro, and Epson, began advertising the hundreds of dollars of the free software included with their computers. And it was a full version with the manual, support, and everything. This created the market and made his software popular, but he still needed to solve the problems of establishing a high dollar value for his product, and he did this by inventing the End User License Agreement, or EULA. Basically, it's a label that comes inside the box of your software, informing you that by breaking the seal on the disks, you agree to a whole host of conditions, including not copying the software. When he first did this, he was heavily criticized, and many thought since he wasn't ever going to sue anyone, it would just be ignored. But businesses, even small ones, wanted to follow the law, and public institutions had to follow the law. And the value of Wordstar increased from $3 a copy to $300 a copy as a result. And that was the end of freely copied software. After that, he went from a copier to a pirate, from Johnny Appleseed to Long John the Silver, with a stroke of Seymour Rubenstein's pen. So when people like Bill Gates are criticized for stifling innovation through non-competitive practices, the argument could be made that the stability that he and people like Rubenstein brought to the market was in fact a catalyst for innovation. Predictably, two things happened. Barnaby and Rubenstein got rich, and a lot of other people wanted to get rich off their ideas. How rich? About $500,000 a year before the End User License Agreement to 10 times that much after. And for Barnaby's part, he had quite a story too. The 137,000 lines of bulletproof code that comprised Wordstar he wrote in a few weeks. It was estimated it should have taken him 42 years. And because CP/M was an operating system, but not a disk operating system, programs were not compatible between brands, so Barnaby had to port the application to each brand wanting to run it. It was reported he got paid, get this, $100 an hour to write the code, which he could usually get done over a weekend. Barnaby was a legend and celebrity among programmers, right up there with Gary Kildall and Steve Wozniak, and just like Woz, Barnaby was a little weird. He bought an old Rolls-Royce limo and would drive it around dressed as a chauffeur. And in the words of Steve Jobs, Wordstar was insanely great. Arthur C. Clarke, upon meeting Barnaby and Bernstein, said, "I am happy to greet the geniuses who made me a born writer again. Having announced my retirement in 1978, I now have 6 books in the works and 2 probables, all through Wordstar." Even though Wordstar stopped being produced over 2 decades ago, Game of Thrones author George R.R. Martin still uses Wordstar to write. In 1982, a PC version was released, and by 1985, they were the #1 word processor in the world, beating out rivals like Sanwa and WordPerfect. But then the roof caved in. MicroPro seemed indifferent to customer feedback, with customers referring to their customer service policy as "contact your dealer." And to be fair, MicroPro was a software company, as opposed to WordPerfect, who were a professional word processor provider. Wall Street, as they often do with high-tech companies, was pushing for DOS compatibility and better file management. As a simple problem to solve today, Wordstar lacked an internal file manager. This meant you could only save to one directory and retrieve files from one directory. In late 1979, Rob Barnaby took a vacation, which ended in his resignation in 1980. Barnaby would continue to port the software to several other computers, including the TRS-80, Epson, Osborne, and K-Pro, but as a contractor. In response to Barnaby's departure, and likely from dealing with his own personal stress, Rubenstein brought in venture capitalist Fred Adler. Adler was credited for getting funding for Data General Corporation and, according to the New York Times, was the most successful venture capitalist in 1980. Almost immediately, the company began changing. First, a host of plugins were released with version 2 of Wordstar. The second version used copy protection, a very unpopular move, and made them lose their biggest retail partner, Computerland. To make matters worse, without Barnaby, all the talent also left. The company really did a 180, changing their focus from retail to big business customer. They hired over 12 people to rewrite the hundreds of thousands of lines of code that would port the assembler application to Unix at the request of AT&T. Several more creative engineers and programmers were laid off. And 3, Peter Miro, Stan Reynolds, and Richard Post, made a deal with Z80 inventor George Moreau to start Newstar, which created a nearly Wordstar clone. Many of the features that fans had been calling for, such as file management, laser printer support, and integrated spell checking, were found in the first 2 new Word releases. Wordstar responded to the new competition by coming out with new version 3, which is essentially version 2 with the copy protection removed. The company went public in 1984, but Rubenstein still retained a controlling interest. Barnaby, who had surrendered his options when he left, got nothing from the public offering. But Rubenstein and the board quarreled over the release of version 4, also known as Wordstar 2000. According to Rubenstein, he had nothing to do with the release of version 4, which is widely regarded as absolute digital garbage. The software was not even backwards compatible with itself. And to say critics didn't like it was an understatement. Everyone hated it, and even though version 3 remained a number 1 seller through 1985, by the end of 1986 it had dropped to 6th place. Rubenstein suffered a heart attack in 1985, and under duress, according to him, signed away the company from his hospital bed. It's about this same time that everyone started suing everyone else. The new owners of the bones of MSI sued, claiming they had still contractual control over Barnaby, and Wordstar belonged to them. Rubenstein sued the company and tried to get it back, and Wordstar filed a countersuit and also sued the group of 3 who wrote Newstar.
Something about the ways of loving, but I tell you, baby, that something's wrong, something's wrong. Look to the sky above and the mud below. Something drives me crazy. Got to get away. Goodbye, 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 goodbye. It's without a doubt. I'm telling you, I'm burned out. Cranky is running on empty. I fall far too long, far too long. I need you, cause I'm getting so low. Not the kind you give me, it makes me feel so bad. Goodbye, 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 goodbye. I need you, and not the kind you give me, makes me feel so bad. Goodbye, 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 goodbye. Can't believe, still around, it's getting kinda late, gonna leave, for a change of scenery, I'm going crazy, it's not the same, since you've been around, I'm crazy, so crazy, treat me like a dirty clown, always give my dollar, never got no constantly smear, you couldn't tell us anything, I'm point of view. You always put on making my friends. You couldn't be asking to realize that you knew I'm crazy and like you. Maybe you think almost like taking you out of your mind. Don't just call me on and wasting your time. Well, I know something about the ways of loving, but I tell you, baby, that something's wrong. Look to the sky above and the mud below. Something drives me crazy. I got to get away. I need you. Not the kind you give me. Goodbye, 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 goodbye.